Lucille Ball's hand was trembling on Johnny Carson's shoulder. "Johnny, stop. Please stop." There was a fragility in her voice that the 68-year-old legendary comedian had never shown before. Robin Williams stood frozen at the other end of the stage, mouth agape, having never witnessed anything like this before. When that night's episode of The Tonight Show went off the air at 11:52 p.m., an unprecedented event in American television history had occurred. What Carson had innocently started with "let's do something different tonight" had spiraled out of control within 8 minutes, reducing Lucille Ball to tears and leaving Williams speechless. The cameras in the studio had captured everything. Every tear, every tremor, every cracking voice. The 300 audience members in Studio 6B didn't speak to anyone on their way home that night, because they had just witnessed the collapse of America's most beloved comedy icon. And no one could have predicted that behind Lucille Ball's reaction that night lay a truth that nobody had known since. To understand this event, we must go back to the summer of 1982, the most contradictory period of Robin Williams's life. In October 1982, Robin Williams was one of America's most famous comedians. Mork and Mindy was in its 4th season, and Williams's impressions, quick wit, and boundless energy had transformed him into a television phenomenon. The 31-year-old Williams lived in his $2.5 million home in Beverly Hills, performed improvisational comedy at the Comedy Store through the nights, and made people laugh for hours on set during the days. From the outside, it was a perfect life. But those close to him saw something different. Robin was very different that summer, his former assistant Martha Levine would say years later. He was constantly in motion, as if something would break if he stopped and was alone with himself. He couldn't handle quiet moments. Once we were driving together and I turned off the radio. There was silence. Robin's hands started trembling. I immediately turned the radio back on. Williams's first marriage had begun to crack. The distance between him and Valerie Velarde grew wider each day, and Williams came home at increasingly late hours. In those years when cocaine was in vogue in Hollywood, Williams had also begun to lose himself in this dark tunnel. Bright at parties, dark at home, explosive energy on stage, a collapsing man backstage. But nobody knew, because when the stage lights came on, Williams was always that amazing, crazy Robin. Nobody asked what happened when the lights went out. Perhaps they were afraid to ask. The Tonight Show was Johnny Carson's royal throne. NBC's Studio 6B in Burbank had been the center of Carson's empire since 1972. Red velvet curtains at the studio entrance, 300-seat audience capacity, wood-paneled walls, and that famous rainbow-colored curtain. Carson's desk was on the left side of the stage, the guest chair on the right, and Doc Severinsen's orchestra section was at the back. Everything operated in perfect order. Carson loved this order. Control was in his hands. But that night, control would be in no one's hands. The Friday night episode on October 15, 1982, was a special night. Williams would be appearing on The Tonight Show for the 3rd time, but this time there was a difference. Lucille Ball was also on stage. The 71-year-old legend was on a promotional tour for a new TV movie. Carson loved Ball. There was mutual respect and warm friendship between them. During the afternoon rehearsals, Williams appeared tense. The comedian, who was usually energetic even during rehearsals, was quieter and more withdrawn that day. Makeup artist Linda Harrison would never forget the expression she saw on Williams's face as he stared at the mirror in his dressing room. His eyes were there, but it was like he was somewhere far away. "Robin, are you okay?" I asked. He laughed. He laughed like he always did and said, "I'm great." But his tone was fake. "I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know a fake smile when I see one." Carson's plan for that evening was simple. First chat with Ball, then bring Williams on stage and talk about some old episode. At the 5:30 p.m. production meeting, Fred de Cordova had told Carson, "Let's keep it relaxed tonight, Johnny. You've got 2 legends with you. The show will carry itself." Carson had nodded. No one could have predicted that a spontaneous idea that crossed Carson's mind at the last moment would turn that night into one of television history's strangest moments. But the seeds of that night had actually been planted 3 days earlier. On Tuesday morning, October 12th, Williams had performed at the Comedy Store until 4 a.m. That night he had done 2 hours of non-stop improv on stage, drowning the audience in laughter. But when he returned backstage, his face was blank. When comedian Richard Lewis, who was with him, said, "You're incredible, Robin, truly incredible," Williams had simply replied, "I know." There was exhaustion in his voice. "But I can't do this forever, Richard. Someday I'll have to stop." Lewis never forgot that moment. It was the first time I saw Robin truly vulnerable. He always had his mask on, but that night, for those few seconds, the mask dropped. And what I saw underneath frightened me. It was 2 days after that conversation. On Thursday afternoon, October 14th, Williams called the Tonight Show production. He told the assistant, "I might need to cancel tomorrow's show." The assistant was surprised. "Why? Are you sick?" Williams was silent for a moment. "No, I just don't feel ready." But half an hour later he called again. "Never mind. I'll go. I have to go." And then that day came. On Friday morning, October 15th, at 9 a.m., Williams left home. Valerie had told him at breakfast, "I'll be watching tonight." Williams had smiled but said nothing. As he drove to the NBC studios, a Kenny Loggins song was playing on the radio. Williams turned off the radio. He preferred the silence. This was unusual for him. When he arrived at the studio, it was 10:30 a.m. He went into the dressing room, closed the door and looked in the mirror. "Come on, Robin," he said to himself. "One more night." His hands were trembling slightly. There was a rehearsal at noon. Carson, Ball and Williams took the stage. Williams did a few impressions. Ball laughed. Carson nodded. "Great, Robin. Be just like that tonight." But production assistant Karen White had seen Williams standing in the corridor after the rehearsal, leaning against the wall and taking deep breaths. When she asked Robin, "Is something wrong?" Williams immediately composed himself. No, just gathering my energy." At 5 p.m. he went to makeup. When makeup artist Linda asked Williams, "Is there something special about tonight?" Williams gave a strange answer. "Every night is special, Linda. Being on stage every night is a gift. But sometimes it's a heavy gift." Backstage, 20 minutes before the show started, Williams was pacing in the wings. Lucille Ball saw him and approached. "Robin, sweetie, you look nervous." Williams stopped and looked at Ball. At that moment he wanted to say something. He opened his mouth but then decided against it. "No, Lucille, I'm always like this. Energy." Ball smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. "You know what? I've been in this business for 40 years too, and I know energetic people like you. Sometimes that energy is something that needs to be controlled." Williams nodded but said nothing. He didn't know yet that in a few hours that energy would completely spiral out of control. At 5:26 p.m., Doc Severinsen took the stage for orchestra rehearsal. The 300-seat audience was waiting excitedly. At 5:30 p.m., the studio lights went dark. "Ladies and gentlemen, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson." Ed McMahon's voice echoed. Applause erupted. Carson emerged from behind the curtain with his usual cool, controlled demeanor. He waved to the cameras and sat at his desk. The first 15 minutes went normally. Carson did his monologue, a few jokes, a few political quips. Audience laughed. Then he introduced his first guest, "My dear friend, the one and only, Lucille Ball." Ball came on stage in a red dress, with her iconic hair and that captivating smile. Carson stood up and embraced Ball. For 20 minutes Ball talked about her new TV movie. Carson asked about old, "I Love Lucy" memories. Everything was going perfectly. At 5:52 p.m., Carson turned to the audience. "And now, tonight's second guest, a ball of energy, Robin Williams." Applause erupted. Williams emerged from behind the curtain. He walked to the stage with quick steps and his typical wild energy. He shook hands with Carson, embraced Ball, and sat in the guest chair. The first 5 minutes went normally. Carson asked about Mork and Mindy. Williams did a few impressions: Ronald Reagan, John Wayne, James Cagney. The audience roared with laughter. Even Ball was laughing, but Carson was watching carefully. Williams's energy was different. He was fast as always, but there was a desperation, as if he was running to avoid stopping. At 5:58 p.m., Carson made a spontaneous decision. It wasn't in the script. It hadn't been discussed in the production meeting, but Carson felt like it in that moment. He turned to the audience. "You know, tonight is a very special night. I have two magnificent comedians with me. Robin, Lucille, what do you say? Let's do something different tonight." Williams raised his eyebrows. "Different? Johnny, I'm always different." The audience laughed. Carson laughed. "No, what I mean is, what do you say we play an improv game? Let's take questions from the audience and you two answer them. Completely spontaneous, no script at all." Gaz widened. "Johnny, are you serious?" There was both excitement and slight concern in her voice. Williams was silent for a moment. At that moment, he felt something. A warning inside him. "Maybe we should stick to the script tonight," he said. But there was hesitation in his voice. Carson smiled. "Come on, Robin. Where's that famous courage of yours? And at that moment, Williams agreed. Okay, let's do it. But his hands were trembling slightly on the armrests of the chair. Carson turned to the audience. All right, would any of you like to ask these two legends a question? Among the 300 people, hands went up. Carson pointed to someone. A middle-aged woman stood up. Robin, are you as energetic in real life as you are on TV? Williams laughed. Of course. I wake up at 6 a.m. and eat breakfast on a trampoline. The audience laughed, but the answer was somewhat mechanical. The second question came. A young man, Lucille, what was the funniest moment while filming I Love Lucy? Ball told her story, the audience laughed. The third question. A woman sitting in the front. Robin, I'm wondering, don't you ever get tired? I mean being funny all the time, making people laugh constantly, doesn't it ever get heavy? Silence. Williams froze. Ball looked at him. Carson looked at him. The audience waited. Williams opened his mouth but said nothing for a moment. Then he laughed. Tired? Me. I'm the Energizer Bunny. I never stop. But there was a crack in his voice. Carson noticed. Ball noticed. And the production crew, watching the monitors, noticed. Something was going wrong. But the real storm hadn't started yet. When the fourth question came, the clock showed 6:03 p.m. A man sitting in the back stood up. 30s, wearing glasses. Robin, you're Hollywood's fastest comedian. But I'm wondering, when you go home, when the lights go out, when there are no cameras, are you still the same Robin? Williams's face changed, just for a second. So brief that most of the audience didn't notice. But Carson noticed. Ball noticed. And the cameras caught it. Williams's hand gripped the armrest tightly. His fingers turned white. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. He said, his voice cracked. I'm always the same. But this time nobody laughed. Carson leaned forward. Robin, are you okay? Williams turned his head and looked at Carson. In that moment, there was something in his eyes, desperation, exhaustion. Johnny, he said. His voice had dropped to a whisper. I have to be Robin Williams all the time. When I wake up in the morning, when I brush my teeth, when I drive, when I go shopping, everyone expects Robin Williams, that energetic, crazy, funny guy. But silence fell. 300 people were frozen. The camera operators stood motionless in their positions. In the production booth, Fred de Cordova whispered, My God. Williams stood up. His hand was trembling. I'm tired, he said. His voice began to rise. I'm tired of being funny. I'm tired of making everyone laugh. Being fast all the time, being smart all the time, being energetic all the time. I'm not a person anymore. I'm a performance. And this performance never ends. Ball stood up. There was concern on her face. Robin, sweetie, no. Williams turned and looked at Ball. His eyes were welling up. You understand, Lucille. You lived this. For 40 years you were Lucy Ricardo. But were you ever able to be the real Lucille Ball? Were you ever able to just be yourself? Ball froze. Her hands trembled slightly. At that moment, the exhaustion of years was reflected on her face. Robin, she said. Her voice broke. Williams began pacing the stage. His hands grabbed his hair. You know everyone expects something from me. My agency, the production company, fans, the press, they all want Robin Williams. Every morning when I wake up I have to be that man. I have to be funny even at breakfast. I have to make people laugh even at the grocery store. I can't be me for even a minute, but I just want to be Robin. Just Robin. That kid who studied theater at Juilliard, who loved Shakespeare, who loved quiet nights. That kid loved reading books. He loved sitting in the park and thinking. But that kid is dead. That kid died the day he played the Mork character in 1978. And in his place came a machine. A laughing machine. Lucille Ball's hand went to her mouth. Her shoulders began to tremble. Tears streamed from her eyes, because what Williams was saying was a mirror of her own life. Williams turned and looked at the camera. And the worst part, he said. His voice was a whisper, but the microphone caught every word. The worst part is I'm the same at home. My wife looks at me and sees Robin Williams. My friends talk to me and listen to Robin Williams. Nobody sees the real me, because I've forgotten how to show the real me. At that moment, Williams collapsed. Literally, his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor in the middle of the stage. His hands covered his face. His shoulders were shaking. The studio was frozen. 300 people held their breath. They were live, 15 million people at home were watching this moment on TV, and nobody was doing anything. Camera 3 operator Diane Miller would never forget that moment. I got a close-up of Robin's face. There was such pain in his eyes as if years of accumulation had suddenly burst. I've been behind the camera for 15 years. I've filmed thousands of celebrities, but I could never forget that look. In those eyes was both the helplessness of a child and the exhaustion of a man. I cried behind my mask. Ball was the first to move. She jumped from her chair and ran to Williams's side. The 71-year-old legend knelt down and held Williams's shoulder. "Robin," she said. Her voice had cracked. "Robin, look at me." Williams slowly lowered his hand. His face was covered in tears. He looked at Ball. "I understand," Ball said. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. "God, I understand so well. I've been living the same thing since 1952. Lucy Ricardo swallowed me. At first she was just a character, then she became a phenomenon, and then she became me. When I Love Lucy ended, everyone still expected Lucy. Walking down the street, going to the grocery store, having dinner with friends, everyone was looking for Lucy. "Do the Lucy thing," they'd say. "Make that funny face," they'd say. And I lost Lucille Ball. I don't even know where she is anymore. Williams's eyes widened. "You too?" Ball nodded. "For 30 years I carried that mask. And you know what happened? I didn't escape the mask. The mask escaped me, because I no longer remember the real me." Carson slowly approached them. His usual confidence, his controlled demeanor was gone. His hands were trembling. He knelt beside Williams and Ball. "Me too," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I too sit behind this desk every night and play Johnny Carson. That cool, smart, controlled man. Everyone loves him. But inside me there's a storm. Every night when I go home, that storm grows. And I can't tell anyone, because Johnny Carson can't be weak. Johnny Carson can't be afraid. Johnny Carson must be in control of everything." Williams looked at Carson. "You're perfect. You're always in control." Carson caught a bitter smile. "Control? I suffer from control phobia, Robin. Everything has to be perfect, because if something gets out of control, I'll get out of control too. Tonight I lost control. And now I understand that maybe control never existed." The three of them sat there, in the middle of the stage, love, in front of 15 million people, America's three comedy legends. The masks had fallen, and nobody was laughing. One of the audience members, a 52-year-old woman named Margaret Foster, stood up. Her hands were trembling. "I've been a housewife for 25 years, and nobody calls me Margaret. I'm mom, I'm wife, I'm the neighbor lady, but I've forgotten who I am." Another audience member stood up, then another, and another. Within 5 minutes, half of the 300 people were standing. Some were crying, some were standing silently. They were all looking at each other. Williams slowly stood up. His face was still tear-stained, but there was a change. His shoulders had lightened. Ball and Carson also stood up. Carson turned to the camera. "I guess tonight turned out very different," he said. He tried to smile but couldn't. "We're not going to commercial. I think we need to end here tonight." The live broadcast ended at 6:11 p.m. Nobody in Studio 6B was moving. Fred de Cordova was looking at the stage from the booth window. "I've been in this business for 40 years, he whispered to his assistant. "And I've never seen anything like this." The audience was slowly leaving. Nobody was speaking. Williams, Ball, and Carson sat at the edge of the stage, side by side, in silence. For a long time none of them spoke. Then Williams raised his head. "I'm sorry, I ruined everything." Ball placed her hand on Williams's hand. "You didn't ruin anything. You saved." "What did I save?" "Yourself," Carson said. There was a softness in his voice. "You saved yourself tonight, Robin." Carson stood up and walked to the window. He looked at Burbank's night lights. "When I started this job in 1962, I made a decision. I would never show the real Johnny Carson, because the real me wasn't interesting enough. But tonight you forced me. You pulled me out of that mask. And you know what I felt? Fear, but at the same time lightness, as if the weight of years fell from my shoulders. When I played Lucy Ricardo in 1952, I thought it would just be a role, a character. But Lucy swallowed me. For 30 years I lived in Lucy's shadow. But tonight I remembered Lucille Ball, and that remembering was painful but beautiful." Half an hour after the live broadcast ended, Williams, Carson, and Ball were sitting backstage. The fourth-floor corridor of NBC was quiet. Williams was holding a cup of coffee. His hands weren't trembling anymore. I'm going to call my wife in the morning. He said, we're going to have a real conversation. For the first time, Ball nodded. Good, because marriages wear masks too. When I was married to Desi, we were both playing roles. He was the perfect husband. I was the perfect wife. But neither of us was real. And eventually everything collapsed. The door opened. Fred de Cordova walked in. Johnny, the NBC executives are calling you. They want a meeting tomorrow morning. Carson nodded. I guess tonight's stunt was a bit unusual. Fred paused. Unusual. Johnny, the phone lines exploded. We got 40,000 calls in 15 minutes, and you know what they're saying? They're saying thank you. Because you gave them a gift tonight. The gift of reality. Williams stood up. But I lost control. You were honest, Fred said. And that's the rarest thing in television. Honest. Exactly 3 days had passed since that night. On Monday morning, October 18th, Williams was sitting at breakfast with Valerie. Both were silent. Then Williams spoke. I'm scared. Valerie reached out and touched Williams's hand. Why? Because I thought you married Robin Williams. But what if you don't love the real me? Valerie smiled. There were tears in her eyes. Robin, I already love the real you. You just couldn't see it. That morning Williams had cried. But this time it was different. This time it was relieving. After that night, The Tonight Show was never the same. Carson was warmer, more human. Williams continued his career. In 1987, he was nominated for an Oscar for Good Morning Vietnam. But he was different now. In interviews, he would say, that 1982 night saved me. Lucille Ball, a few months before her death in 1989, said this in her final interview. I was the real Lucille Ball twice in my life. The first was in 1952, before I Love Lucy started. The second was in 1982, in Johnny's studio, next to Robin, and that second moment was more valuable. What happened live that night remained secret for years. NBC archived the recordings but never showed them again. In the 1990s, some TV historians researched that night. They spoke with some of the audience members. Margaret Foster said this in an interview she gave in 2005. That night I went home and looked in the mirror. And I said to myself, Margaret, for the first time in 25 years. And you know what happened? I cried. But it was a beautiful crying. Carson, when he retired from The Tonight Show in 1992, said this on his final episode. For 30 years I was Johnny Carson for you. And sometimes I forgot the real Johnny. But one night, in 1982, a young comedian reminded me to be real. In 2018, a documentary filmmaker found recordings of that night. Only an 11-minute portion remained. But those 11 minutes were one of television history's most striking moments. When the documentary aired, viewers cried, because that night 3 legends had removed their masks. And perhaps most importantly, that night 15 million people sat in front of their TVs at home and thought about their own masks. Today, when we remember Robin Williams, we remember him as Mork, as Mrs. Doubtfire, as the genie. But on that 1982 night, we saw the real Robin, the man behind the mask, tired, fragile, but brave. And that moment was more valuable than all his movies. Because that moment was real. Sometimes behind the brightest smiles lies the deepest darkness. But showing that darkness takes courage. And that night, 3 brave people gave us the greatest gift. Reality. That night everyone removed their masks. And the world changed. Fred de Cordova, 1992. If this story moved you, like and follow the channel. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever felt like you were wearing a mask? And remember, sometimes behind the brightest performances hide the loneliest people. That night, 3 lonely people found each other.